The envelope was still in my hand when I heard the deadbolt turn. Not my key. Someone else's. And the door to the house I had grown up in swung open, and my brother Marcus stood in the frame with a look on his face I had never seen before, something between satisfaction and embarrassment, which in my experience is the most dangerous combination a person can wear. He said my suitcase was already on the porch. I looked down. It was. I had flown in from Atlanta that morning, 14 hours after we buried our mother, because I wanted to sleep one night in the bedroom where she used to braid my hair. That was all I wanted. One night with the smell of her cedar closet and the sound of the old radiator clicking in the hallway. I had not asked for anything else. And Marcus had changed the locks. The envelope in my hand had my name on it in Mama's handwriting. I had found it tucked inside the lining of her Bible, the one the pastor handed me at the graveside because Mama had written my name on the inside cover. I had not opened it yet. Something in me had been waiting, and standing there on the porch of the house on Birchwood Lane, with my suitcase at my feet and my brother staring at me like I was a stranger collecting donations, I understood that whatever was inside that envelope was connected to this moment in a way I could not yet explain. I slipped it into my coat pocket, and I left without a word. Let me tell you who I am, so you understand what kind of silence I am capable of. My name is Celeste Adrienne Monroe. I am the youngest daughter of Dorothy Jean Monroe, who was born in Beaufort, South Carolina in 1948, and who spent 53 years building a life in Birmingham, Alabama, with her own hands, her own money, and a kind of dignity that never required an audience. My mother was not a woman who asked for recognition. She was a woman who kept receipts. I am 41 years old. I have a master's degree in accounting, and I have run my own small firm for 11 years. I live in Atlanta, in a house I bought myself, and I am good at numbers the way some people are good at reading weather. By instinct, by attention. By learning early that everything has a pattern if you look long enough. Marcus is my older brother by 8 years. He is the kind of man who mistakes confidence for competence, and who has always believed that being in the room when a decision was made is the same as having made the decision. He managed our mother's affairs for the last 3 years of her life, after her hip replacement slowed her down. He drove her to appointments. He signed for her packages. He told everyone who would listen that he was the one holding the family together. Our sister Renata lives in Memphis. She is softer than Marcus and sharper than she appears, and she had called me twice in the week before Mama passed to say that something felt wrong. She could not name it. Just a feeling, she said. The kind of feeling you get when someone in your house has moved something 2 inches to the left, and everything looks the same, but nothing is where it belongs. I should have listened harder. Our mother died on a Tuesday in February, in the house on Birchwood Lane, with the morning light coming through the curtains. She had hung herself in 1987. The doctor said it was peaceful. I believe that. Mama had always known how to leave a room with her head up. Marcus called me 40 minutes after it happened. He was already talking about the estate before he finished telling me she was gone. I remember standing in my kitchen in Atlanta, holding the phone against my ear, listening to him say the words "the house" and her accounts, and "we need to move quickly," and feeling something go very still inside me, a stillness I had learned to pay attention to, the kind that comes not from peace, but from the body preparing itself for something it already suspects. I flew in the next morning. At the funeral, Marcus stood at the front of the church, like a man presiding over something that already belonged to him. He greeted people with a handshake that was 1 degree too firm. He thanked the pastor for handling everything, as though our mother's life were a catering order. Renata sat beside me in the second pew, and at one point she leaned over and whispered, "He's already told the neighbors the house is his." I looked at her. She looked at me. Neither of us said anything else. After the repast, when the neighbors had gone home and the dishes were washed and Renata had taken her children back to the hotel, I went back to the house alone. Marcus had given me a key that morning, the original key, the one from my childhood, to help bring flowers and casserole dishes inside. That key worked when I arrived. By the time I tried to leave and come back after dinner, the lock had been changed. And that is where this story began. Standing on the porch in the February cold, my mother's Bible under my arm, and an unopened envelope in my coat pocket, and a suitcase that smelled like cedar, because Marcus had apparently found the time, on the day we buried our mother, to pack my things and remove me from the premises. I checked into the same hotel as Renata. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time with the television off and the curtains open, and the orange light of the parking lot pressing through the window. I turned the envelope over in my hands, Mama's handwriting on the front, just my name. Celeste, not Celeste and Marcus, not to my children. Just me. I didn't open it that night, because I had learned something from my mother. Timing is everything, and there are documents you do not open until you are ready to do something about what's inside. I called an attorney the next morning, not because I knew what was in the envelope, but because I had done enough estate work in my accounting practice to know that when a man changes the locks on a property the day after a funeral, he is either the rightful owner with legitimate urgency, or he is a man who is afraid of what will happen when everyone stops crying and starts reading. I had a colleague in Birmingham, a woman named Patricia Okafor, who runs a small but formidable estate and property law practice out of a renovated house on 3rd Avenue North. We had worked together twice before on client matters. I had always liked her because she spoke the way my mother spoke, quietly, completely, and only once. I called her at 8 in the morning. She answered before the second ring. I told her the situation in under 4 minutes. She asked 2 questions. The first was whether Mama had ever mentioned updating her will in the last 3 years. I said I didn't know. She asked the second question slowly, like she was placing something fragile on a shelf. Did your mother own the house outright, or was there a mortgage? I told her I believed it was paid off. Mama had mentioned once, maybe 10 years ago, being done with the bank. She'd made it sound like a celebration, the way she said it, like crossing a finish line. Patricia said she would start pulling records. She said I should not contact Marcus yet. She said I should open the envelope. I went to the hotel dining room. I got coffee. I found a corner table by the window, the one where the morning light came in at a low angle and made everything look a little more serious than it was. I sat down. I took the envelope out of my purse. Mama's handwriting was unhurried. She had always written that way, like she had all the time in the world, like the pen itself knew better than to rush her. I broke the seal. There were 2 things inside. A letter, written on 3 pages of her good stationery, the cream-colored kind she kept in the drawer of her secretary desk for what she called serious correspondence, and a smaller sealed envelope inside this one, labeled in her handwriting, "For your attorney." My hands did not shake, but my coffee went cold, and I didn't notice until much later. I read the letter. I will not tell you everything she wrote, because some things between a mother and her youngest daughter are not for the world. But I will tell you what mattered. I will tell you what Mama had been keeping. She told me that 3 years ago, when her hip was healing and Marcus had come to help manage things, she had grown concerned. She had watched the way he spoke to her financial advisor. She had noticed small discrepancies in account statements she was no longer receiving directly. And she had done something that most people would not expect from a 73-year-old woman recovering from surgery in a house on Birchwood Lane. She had hired her own attorney, quietly, without telling Marcus or Renata or me. She had walked into Patricia Okafor's office 18 months before she died. I would later learn that Patricia already knew who she was, had been waiting for my call the way you wait for a storm you can already smell. And she had revised her will, completely. And she had done one other thing. She had transferred the deed to the house on Birchwood Lane into my name, not Marcus's, mine. Sole ownership, recorded with the Jefferson County Probate Court 14 months ago, with Patricia as the notarizing attorney and 2 witnesses whose signatures I recognized from our church. The house had been mine, legally, for over a year. While Marcus drove Mama to her appointments and signed for her packages and told the neighbors it would all come to him. While I worked in Atlanta and trusted that things were being handled. The house had been mine. The smaller envelope was the recorded deed copy. I sat at that table for a very long time. I want to tell you about the morning Patricia called Marcus's attorney, because Marcus had an attorney. Of course he did. He had found one within 48 hours of Mama's death, a man named Gerald Fitch who operated out of a strip mall on the eastern side of the county and who had apparently drafted some document Marcus was calling a letter of intent to administer the estate, which had no legal standing that I could identify, and which seemed to have been written in a hurry by someone who billed by the page. Patricia made one call. She was in her office. I was sitting across the desk from her, in a chair that was upholstered in a dark green fabric, holding a cup of tea she had offered me before we began. Through her window, I could see a magnolia tree, bare in February, its branches perfectly still. She dialed. She waited. She introduced herself and her firm, and then she said, in a tone that was entirely without drama, "I'm calling regarding the property at 44117 Birchwood Lane, Birmingham, Jefferson County. My client holds the recorded deed to that property, transferred by Dorothy Jean Monroe 14 months prior to her death. I'm giving you the opportunity to advise your client to vacate voluntarily before we proceed to the probate court, to formalize the estate and address any unlawful occupation of the premises." She listened for a moment. Then she said, "The deed number is in the Jefferson County records. Public record. Your client's name does not appear on it. Mine does." She meant my name. The magnolia outside the window did not move. The tea was warm in my hands, and somewhere across the city, I imagined Marcus sitting very still in a room that he had believed, for the entirety of his life, was his inheritance. He did not vacate voluntarily. I had not expected him to. Marcus had spent 3 years performing the role of the responsible one, the one who stayed, the one who sacrificed. He had built an entire identity around the idea of his entitlement to that house. And men who have built their identities on a claim do not let go of the claim easily. They let go of it loudly, or they let go of it in a courtroom. But they do not do it quietly on a Tuesday morning because an attorney left a polite message. He called me instead. It was 8:15 in the evening, 2 days after Patricia made contact. I was in my hotel room, working through estate financial records that Patricia had subpoenaed, bank statements, account transfers, a series of transactions from the 18 months Marcus had been managing things that I was finding very, very interesting. The kind of interesting that has a word for it in accounting. The phone rang. I looked at it. I answered. "You set me up." His voice was lower than I remembered, flat in a way that meant he was working hard to control something underneath it. "You and Mama, you set this whole thing up, and you let me walk around." "Marcus." He stopped. "I am going to let you finish whatever you called to say. And then I am going to tell you one thing. And then this conversation is going to be over, because the next conversation you and I have will be through attorneys." He was quiet for a moment. Then he started again, quieter. He said he had been there. He had given up 3 years. He had done everything. He said Mama wasn't in her right mind when she signed anything Patricia showed her. That it would never hold up. That he would contest it. That I had always been Mama's favorite and it wasn't fair. I let him finish. Then I said, Mama was in her right mind every day of her life. You know that. And I think somewhere underneath all of this, you have known for a while that she saw what you were doing. The line was very quiet. I'll see you in court, I said, and I ended the call. Renata texted me 10 minutes later. Just 3 words. I'm with you. The probate hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in March. I want to tell you what that morning felt like, because I think people sometimes imagine that moments of justice arrive with fanfare, with music, with declarations, with the feeling of a clenched fist finally opening. This one did not arrive that way. It arrived like a winter morning. Quiet, certain, inevitable the way cold air is inevitable when you have been walking toward it for a long time. I wore a charcoal gray suit that I had bought in Atlanta 2 years before for a client presentation. I wore my mother's pearl earrings, the small ones she wore to church. I had not been able to bring myself to wear jewelry at the funeral. But that morning, getting dressed in the hotel room with the iron heating on the bathroom counter and the early light just beginning to color the curtains, I opened the small pouch Renata had pressed into my hand after the repast, and I put them in. Patricia had prepared everything. The deed. The will, which divided Mama's financial accounts between me and Renata in equal shares, with a specific notation that Marcus was to receive his portion of the liquid assets, a smaller amount than he expected, documented clearly, with the reasoning Mama had written out in her own words in a separate letter to the court that Patricia had kept sealed for exactly this occasion. Mama had thought of everything. Because of course she had. The courtroom was small and plain and smelled like the particular combination of old paper and central heating that all county courtrooms seem to share. Marcus came in with Gerald Fitch, who carried a briefcase that looked expensive and a face that looked uncertain. Marcus did not look at me when he sat down. His jaw was tight. His suit was pressed. He was performing composure the same way he had performed grief at the funeral, with the right surface and nothing underneath. The judge was a woman. 50s, reading glasses low on her nose, with the specific brand of unhurried authority that comes from spending decades watching people lie to her face and getting very good at seeing through it. Gerald Fitch made his argument. He cited Marcus's contribution, his residency in the property for the past year, the lack of direct notification from the decedent to Marcus of any change in estate plans. He used the phrase presumption of equitable distribution twice and good faith 4 times. Patricia stood up. She placed the deed on the table like she was setting down a glass of water. Ordinary. Definitive. She cited the recording date, the transfer date, the notarization, the witnesses. She noted that the deed was public record and had been available to anyone who looked. She noted that her client had not sought to remove her brother from the property during the decedent's lifetime, out of respect for the family situation. She noted that the locks had been changed within hours of the funeral, while her client was on the property, and that this constituted attempted unlawful exclusion from a legally owned residence. The judge looked at the deed. She looked at Gerald Fitch. She took off her reading glasses. "Counselor," she said, addressing Gerald Fitch, "has your client reviewed the recorded deed?" Gerald Fitch cleared his throat. "Your Honor, we believe the transfer was made under conditions that's not what I asked." The judge's voice did not rise. It dropped. "Has your client reviewed the recorded deed, which is a public document available at the Jefferson County Probate Office, and which indicates that the property at 4417 Birchwood Lane transferred to Celeste Adrienne Monroe 14 months ago?" A long silence. "We intend to contest the conditions of transfer," Gerald Fitch said. The judge put her glasses back on. She made a note. She looked out at the room for a moment, at me, at Marcus, at Patricia standing quiet and still. And then she said something I have turned over in my mind many times since. Grief makes people believe they're entitled to things they haven't earned. This court deals in documentation. She looked at the deed. The documentation is clear. She ordered the property returned to my possession. She ordered the locks changed to my specifications, at Marcus's expense, within 72 hours. And she noted for the record that any further interference with the property would constitute a civil violation subject to additional proceedings. Marcus walked out of that courtroom without looking at me. I stood for a moment after the room had cleared. Patricia gathered her files. The court officer moved to the next matter on the docket. The overhead lights hummed their low, indifferent hum. And I stood there in my charcoal suit with my mother's pearl earrings in my ears, and I breathed. I want to tell you about going back to the house. It was a Saturday, 4 days after the hearing. The court-ordered locksmith had come and gone. I had a new key, cut to my name on the tag, which was the locksmith's small courtesy and which I appreciated more than I could say. I drove to Birchwood Lane in the late afternoon, when the light in Birmingham in early spring comes in low and golden and makes everything look like it's remembering something. The Bradford pear trees at the end of the block were just beginning to show white. The yard needed work. The paint on the front porch railing had begun to peel in one corner, and I made a note to address that. I put the key in the lock. The door opened. Inside, the house smelled like cedar and something faintly sweet. The candles Mama burned, beeswax ones from the church bazaar. And even though there had been no candle burning in this house for weeks, the smell had stayed. Smell is the most loyal of all the senses. It does not leave when the person does. I walked through the front room. The furniture was where it had always been. Mama's secretary desk stood against the east wall, with its small brass lamp and its closed lid. The oval mirror above the mantel reflected the room and the last of the afternoon light. On the mantel itself, exactly where it had always stood, was the photograph. Mama, at maybe 35, standing in the yard of this very house in a yellow dress, laughing at something outside the frame, her eyes bright and unguarded, in a way the woman I knew as an adult rarely showed the world. I stood in front of that photograph for a long time. Mama had known. She had watched and calculated and planned and moved her pieces quietly across a board no one else knew existed. She had protected this house, protected me, without a single word of warning, because warning would have changed the shape of what she was building. She had needed Marcus to believe he was winning right up until the moment the gavel came down, because if he had known, he would have complicated things, stalled things, dragged things into terrain that hurt everyone. So she said nothing. She just went to see Patricia. She just signed the deed. She just slipped an envelope into the lining of her Bible with my name on the front, and she trusted me to find it at exactly the right moment. There is a kind of love that doesn't announce itself. It builds quietly, over years, in actions so ordinary they look like nothing from the outside. A name on a deed, a folded envelope, a small attorney's office on 3rd Avenue North visited without telling a soul. It is the kind of love that says, I see what is coming, and I have already handled it, and you do not need to be afraid. I sat down in Mama's armchair. The one beside the window, upholstered in deep blue, worn smooth at the arms from decades of her elbows resting there. I sat in it the way you sit in a place that was made for someone else, carefully at first, and then with your whole weight. The light in the room shifted. The day was nearly gone. I pulled the key from my pocket. My key to my house. And I held it in my palm and looked at it the way you look at something ordinary that turns out to be everything. Marcus had the financial portion of the estate reviewed. The transactions I had flagged in the account statements were referred to a further proceeding that I will not detail here, except to say that Mama's careful record-keeping, another gift she had left precisely in place, made the accounting clear and the outcome just. Renata flew in from Memphis. We spent a long weekend at the house together, going through closets, talking late into the night, cooking the dishes Mama had taught us from a handwritten recipe book that she had kept in the kitchen drawer beneath the dish towels. The one none of us had ever thought to call an heirloom until she was gone. We found more things she had saved, letters, papers, a savings account passbook, fully documented. Things I will spend the next years learning to understand. But I keep coming back to the envelope. The one with my name on the front in her handwriting. The one I carried for nearly 3 days before I opened it. The one she had tucked inside the lining of her Bible, which she had marked with my name, which she had ensured would come into my hands at the graveside, which she had placed in motion so precisely that I cannot fully comprehend the patience it required. My name. Just my name? Celeste. Not a decree, not a declaration. Just a name written by a woman who had already done everything that needed doing, and who trusted her daughter to handle the rest. There is a lesson in this that has nothing to do with property.